The tragic story of American Airlines Flight 90. American Airlines Flight 90, a scheduled domestic flight, was bound for Cleveland Hopkins International Airport from Washington National Airport, now Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, on January 13, 1982. The flight was a regular service, operating with a McDonnell Douglas DC-9, a trusted aircraft used by American Airlines for its shorter domestic routes. However, this flight became infamous for a tragic accident that has since changed aviation safety protocols and the way airlines handle adverse weather conditions. Background and weather conditions. The day of the flight, January 13, 1982, was one of those winter days in Washington, D.C., marked by treacherous weather conditions. A major snowstorm had blanketed the region, causing significant disruption. Visibility was poor, and the runways were covered with snow and ice. Washington National Airport, which is located just across the Potomac River from the heart of the city, is notorious for its proximity to tall buildings and challenging weather conditions, particularly in the winter months. The icy conditions were a critical factor in what would transpire. Flight 90, a routine operation scheduled for departure at 9 a.m., was not the only flight impacted by the weather that day. Some other planes had been delayed or canceled due to the snowstorm, which was causing widespread visibility issues across the East Coast. Despite these adverse conditions, the crew of American Airlines Flight 90 was confident in their ability to take off and believed they could manage the aircraft in these challenging weather conditions. The aircraft itself, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9, had the reputation of being a reliable and sturdy model. However, what wasn't fully appreciated by the crew was the extent to which the snowstorm had affected not only the runway, but also the aircraft itself, particularly its engines, and the need for proper de-icing procedures. The flight and attempted takeoff. Flight 90 was piloted by Captain Alfred B. Bowers, an experienced pilot with nearly 1,700 flight hours, and First Officer William D. Garrett, who had been with American Airlines for a shorter time but was fully trained for the aircraft. The weather at the time of departure was challenging, but not unusual for a winter day in Washington, D.C. The plane, which was scheduled to depart at 9 a.m., was slightly delayed, and after a standard de-icing procedure, it was cleared for takeoff. The de-icing process, however, had been rushed. The plane had accumulated a considerable amount of ice on its wings due to the snowstorm, which the crew attempted to mitigate with a quick de-icing procedure before takeoff. However, it wasn't a full de-icing, and some ice was still left on the aircraft's wings and tail section. At 9:01 p.m., Flight 90 began its takeoff from runway 36, despite poor visibility and snow covering the runway. The snowstorm made the runway slippery, reducing traction for the aircraft. Snow and ice on the wings disrupted the airflow, preventing the engines from reaching full power. These factors contributed to a reduction in the aircraft's lift capability, meaning the aircraft was unable to reach takeoff speed quickly enough. As the DC-9 hurtled toward the end of the runway, the pilots realized that the aircraft wasn't going to achieve the necessary speed for liftoff. They attempted to abort the takeoff, but by the time they did, the plane had already passed the point of no return. Despite the crew's best efforts, Flight 90 failed to become airborne and skidded off the runway, overran the airport's boundary, and plummeted onto the 14th Street Bridge, which connects Washington, D.C. to Virginia. The DC-9, with its full load of passengers and crew, struck several vehicles on the bridge, killing 4 people on the ground. The plane then crashed into the icy waters of the Potomac River. The impact on the bridge caused an explosive fire, immediately engulfing the plane in flames. Several passengers were trapped inside the wreckage, while others were able to escape, but the freezing temperatures of the Potomac River complicated rescue efforts. The area around the crash site was chaotic, with emergency responders scrambling to save as many lives as possible. Despite the severity of the crash, several survivors were pulled from the wreckage and rushed to the hospital. The rescue efforts were heroic, with bystanders and emergency personnel risking their lives to save others from the icy waters. However, tragically, the crash resulted in the loss of 77 lives. Of the 74 people aboard, only 6 survived, and 4 civilians were killed on the bridge. Investigation and findings. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, conducted an extensive investigation into the crash. Their findings revealed a series of contributing factors, both human and mechanical, that led to the tragic outcome. The main issues identified were inadequate de-icing. While the aircraft had undergone a de-icing procedure, the process was hurried and not enough was done to fully remove the ice that had accumulated on the wings and tail. The residual ice significantly affected the aircraft's ability to achieve lift during takeoff. Runway conditions. The runway was covered with a layer of snow and ice, which made it difficult for the aircraft to gain sufficient speed during its attempted takeoff. Snowplows had been at work on the runway, but the runway was not cleared enough to provide optimal traction for the plane. Crew decisions and weather awareness. The flight crew was confident in their ability to manage the aircraft in the adverse weather, but there were lapses in judgment. The decision to proceed with the takeoff despite the weather conditions, along with a less than adequate de-icing process, played a significant role in the outcome. Engine performance. The ice buildup on the wings hindered the performance of the engines. The reduced airflow to the engines, combined with the snow and ice on the runway, prevented the engines from reaching full power and thrust. Aftermath and changes to aviation safety. In the aftermath of Flight 90, there were widespread changes to aviation safety regulations, particularly concerning de-icing procedures and winter weather operations. The crash highlighted the need for improved de-icing techniques, the importance of clear communication between airline operations and ground crews, and more stringent regulations regarding takeoff in adverse weather conditions. The incident also brought to light the need for better training in winter weather operations for flight crews and airport personnel, and a stronger emphasis on pre-flight checks, especially in snowy conditions. The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, mandated more rigorous procedures for de-icing, and new protocols were established to ensure that aircraft would not take off unless they were completely free of ice. Furthermore, the tragedy of Flight 90 spurred public awareness and sparked a movement toward increased safety standards across the aviation industry, leading to significant improvements in the handling of winter operations. Legacy and memorials. Today, the crash of American Airlines Flight 90 is a somber chapter in the history of aviation. While the lives lost in the tragedy can never be replaced, the lessons learned from this horrific event helped shape a safer future for aviation worldwide. The crash was one of the key turning points in the development of more robust safety practices and regulations, particularly in the management of winter weather operations. A memorial was established for the victims of Flight 90, and the families of the survivors continue to honor the memory of their loved ones. The crash of Flight 90 remains a reminder of the unpredictable nature of aviation and the crucial importance of safety and preparedness in all conditions.